You will marry the Duke in your sister's place, or this family is finished. There is no third road, Marian, do you understand me? None. Everett, Duke of Lockridge, heard the whole of it through the half-open library door of Ashford Court, and did not move a muscle. He had come early, as was his habit, and the butler had shown him to the wrong room, and now he stood among the shelves with his gloves still in his hand while, on the far side of the door, a man he was about to be bound to by law told a woman she had no choice but to marry him. He had not, until that moment, known there were two sisters. The scandal had been the elder one's doing. Cecilia Ashford, the celebrated beauty, the toast of 2 seasons, had run off with a half-pay captain 3 days before her wedding, leaving the Duke of Lockridge jilted before the whole of society and the Ashford family teetering on the edge of ruin. Everett had felt, when the note reached him, chiefly a cold and distant relief. He had never wanted Cecilia. The match had been made by lawyers and mothers, a joining of an old title to a large fortune, and he had gone to it as a man goes to a business he understands and does not enjoy. He had met the beauty perhaps 4 times. She had been dazzling and empty, and had looked at him with the practiced warmth of a woman appraising a coronet, and he had thought, each time, of a lovely room with nothing in it, and had told himself he was too old to expect anything more. What no one knew, what he had told no one because a duke does not confess such things, was that on one of those 4 occasions, in the crush of a music party, he had turned from Cecilia's dazzle and found, half hidden by a pillar, a plainer young woman with ink on her finger and a book she had clearly been reading instead of listening to the harp. She had not known who he was. She had looked up, caught, and instead of simpering had said, low and rueful, "It is a very long concerto, is it not?" And he had said, before he could stop himself, "Interminable," and she had smiled, not the appraising smile, not the coronet smile, but a real one, quick and warm and gone, and he had thought of nothing else for a fortnight. He had made a discreet inquiry. The younger Miss Ashford, Marian. Bookish, they said dismissively. Plain, they said. On the shelf at 3 and 20, of no consequence beside her sister, kept rather in the background so as not to dim the beauty's light. Everett had filed the name away and told himself sternly that a man betrothed to one sister did not moon over the other, and had gone on with the joyless arrangement, and had privately, treacherously, been glad of every excuse to call at Ashford Court where he might, if he were fortunate, catch a glimpse of a plain young woman with ink on her finger. And then Cecilia had run away, and the lawyers and mothers had gone into a frenzy, and the letter had come proposing delicately, desperately, that the contract might be honored after all if his grace could be prevailed upon to accept the younger daughter in her sister's stead. Everett had accepted so quickly that his own solicitor had looked at him strangely. He had let them all believe it was duty. He had let them believe a duke jilted before society would take any respectable bride rather than suffer the humiliation twice over. He had let Marian Ashford's family believe they were foisting a disappointment on him, a lesser sister, a consolation, and he had come to Ashford Court this morning meaning, in his cold, correct way, to do the decent thing and never let her guess that he had wanted precisely her from the beginning. And now, through a half-open door, he heard her father telling her she had no choice. "He does not want me," Marian was saying, and the flat exhaustion in her voice went straight through him. "You know he does not. He wanted Cecilia, everyone wanted Cecilia. He is taking me because I am the only Ashford left to take, and because refusing would shame him twice. I am a repair, Papa, a patch on a torn coat. I will spend my whole life being the sister he settled for, and every soul in 3 counties will know it and pity me, and I," her voice caught, steadied. "I would rather that than see you ruined. I am not refusing. I only ask that you not pretend it is anything but what it is. Do not tell me he wants me. I could bear the marriage. I do not think I could bear the pretending." Everett stood very still among the books, and something in his chest that had been cold and correct for a very long time cracked clean open. To understand why the tearing of that contract would cost him so much less than anyone supposed, one had to understand what the contract had meant to him, which was nothing, and what the woman on the other side of the door had come to mean to him, which was everything, and how thoroughly he had hidden both facts from the whole world, including himself. Everett had come into the dukedom at 23, upon the death of a father he had scarcely known, and had discovered at once that the title was a kind of wall. People arranged their faces before they spoke to him. They wanted things preferment, invitations, connections, marriages, and they dressed the wanting in flattery, and after a few years he had stopped being able to tell flattery from feeling, and had concluded, with the cold logic he applied to everything, that feeling was probably not on offer to a man like him, and that it was wiser not to expect it. He had run his estates well. He had done his duty in the Lords. He had let his mother and the lawyers arrange the match with the celebrated Miss Ashford because it was suitable, and because refusing would have required an energy of objection he did not possess. He had expected the marriage to be like the rest of his life, correct, prosperous, and empty. He had not expected a pillar and a concerto, and a woman with ink on her finger. It shamed him, a little, how much that one small encounter had lodged in him. A grown man, a duke, undone by a single unguarded sentence from a young lady who did not know his name. But that was precisely the thing. She had not known his name, and so what she had given him, that quick, warm, real smile, had been given to him and not to the Duke of Lockridge. And he had been so starved of exactly that, for so long, that the memory had become a kind of secret hoard he took out and turned over when the great houses grew too silent. He had told himself it was nothing. He had gone on with the Cecilia match. He had watched the beauty across drawing rooms and felt not one flicker of what he felt at the mere thought of the sister behind the pillar, and had called himself a fool, and had done nothing, because a betrothed man does nothing, and because he could not imagine a version of events in which he was permitted the thing he wanted. And then the beauty had bolted, and every proper feeling he was supposed to have injured, pride, public shame, cold fury at the Ashfords, had failed entirely to arrive, and in their place had come a single disgraceful, luminous thought. Perhaps now. He had been ashamed of the thought. He was ashamed of it still, standing among the books. But shame had never yet stopped a true thing from being true, and the true thing was that he had wanted Marian Ashford before there was any contract to make him take her, and now the contract was about to make him take her anyway, and she was on the other side of the door believing herself a discard, and every day he let her go on believing it was a day he stole a happiness from her that was rightfully hers. He would not steal it. Whatever else he was cold, stiff, 15 years out of practice at anything warm. He would not build his one chance at a real marriage on a lie that made her small. That was why, when he heard her say, "Do not tell me he wants me," he set down his gloves and knocked on the open door. He should have withdrawn. A gentleman who has overheard a private grief pretends he has not. That was the rule, and Everett had lived his whole life inside the rules. But he found he could not make himself move away and let her go on believing herself a patch on a torn coat for 1 hour longer than necessary. He knocked once on the open door and stepped through it. The effect was immediate and dreadful. Mr. Ashford leapt up, crimson, stammering apologies for the state of the room, for the delay, for everything. And Marian turned, and Everett watched her go white, and then composed her face into a still, careful blankness that he recognized, because it was the same armor he had worn for years. She dropped a curtsy. She said, "Your Grace," in a voice from which every trace of the woman at the music party had been scrubbed away. "Mr. Ashford," said Everett, "I wonder if you would leave us. I should like to speak to your daughter alone. It is quite proper, the door may stand open, and I shall not keep her long." The father fled, torn between terror and relief, no doubt certain the Duke meant to cry off at the last and complete the family's ruin. The door stood open. The house held its breath around them. Marian kept her eyes on the carpet. "Your Grace need not trouble to be gentle," she said. "I know the terms, I have agreed to them. There is no need for a speech." "There is every need," said Everett, "because you have the whole of it wrong, and I will not let you marry me believing a lie, even a lie that flatters me." She looked up at that, wary. He set his gloves down on the table to give his hand something to do, and found that he, the Duke of Lockridge, who negotiated with cabinet ministers without a flutter, did not know where to begin. So he began at the truth. You believe I am marrying you because your sister ran off and left me shamed, and you are the last Ashford to hand, and a duke twice jilted would be a laughingstock. You believe I am settling. Are you not? No, the word came out with more force than he intended. He gentled it. Miss Ashford, there was a music party last spring. A very long concerto Corelli, I think, played abominably, and I turned from your sister, whom I could not for my life think of anything to say to, and I found you behind a pillar reading a book you had smuggled in with ink on your finger, and you looked up and said it was a very long concerto, and I said it was interminable, and you smiled at me. Do you remember? The wariness cracked. Color came up in her face. You were she stopped. I did not know who you were. I thought you were someone's tiresome cousin. I would never have said such a thing to the Duke of Lockridge. Which is precisely why I have thought of it every day since. He took a step nearer. You spoke to me as if I were a man and not a title. In 15 years no one has done that. And I made my inquiries, and I learned you were the younger Miss Ashford, bookish, plain, they used the word plain. And I remember thinking that whoever had first applied it to you had never once looked at your face while you smiled. And I told myself very firmly that a man betrothed to one sister does not think about the other. And I failed at it entirely, every single day, until your sister did me the enormous kindness of running away. Marian's hand had come up to her throat. You cannot mean. When the letter came proposing I take you in Cecilia's place, my solicitor thought me deranged for the speed with which I agreed. He supposed I was desperate to avoid a second scandal. I let him think it. I have let everyone think it. It seemed safer. I have grown so used to being wanted for what I am that I did not know how to say, out loud to your family, I do not want the beauty. I never wanted the beauty. I want the one you keep behind the pillar. It sounded mad. It still sounds mad. But you were standing in this room telling your father not to pretend that I wanted you, and I found I would rather sound mad than let you believe that for one more minute. The room was very quiet. Somewhere in the house a clock ticked. You are saying, Marian said slowly, as if setting each word down with great care lest it break, that you did not settle for me, that you chose me before, when you might have had anyone. I am saying, said Everett, that I have been trying in my cold and clumsy fashion to marry you since April, and that your sister's disgrace, which the whole of society is calling my great misfortune, is the most fortunate thing that has happened to me in 15 years, and that I have not the smallest intention of settling for anyone, least of all you, because a man does not settle for the one thing he has secretly wanted all along. He watched her try and fail to believe it. She had spent so long being the lesser sister, the background, the patch, that the shape of the truth would not fit into the space she had carved for herself. And Everett understood that, understood it in his bones, because he had spent his own life certain that no one would ever want the man under the title, and had believed it so thoroughly that he had nearly let her marry him convinced she was unwanted. Prove it, Marian said suddenly. He blinked. How? You are a duke, you could still cry off. My sister's flight has given you every excuse society would accept. No one would blame you, you would be pitied, not scorned. If you truly want me, not the contract, not the convenience, not the avoidance of a second scandal, then break the contract, tear it up, and then ask me. Ask me the way you would ask a woman you wanted and not a woman you were obliged to take. Her chin came up, and for the first time since he had entered the room, the woman from the music party looked out of her eyes. I will not marry the man my sister jilted. I have too much pride left for that, whatever I told my father. But I might marry the man who put down a duke's advantage and asked a plain woman with ink on her finger to have him, with nothing to gain and everything to lose. That man I could believe. Show me that man. But the 6 weeks between the torn contract and the wedding were not empty, and Everett, who had lived his whole life as though courtship were a formality to be got through, discovered in them a happiness he had not known was available to a man of his temper. He called at Ashford Court nearly every day, and he came now not as a duke discharging an obligation, but as a suitor, which was a thing he had never in his life been permitted to be. He found he was extraordinarily bad at it and did not care. He brought her books, not the fashionable ones, but the odd and difficult ones he suspected she would love, a treatise on the flora of the northern moors, a cramped little volume of translated Greek that no lady was supposed to admit to reading, and he watched her face when she unwrapped them, and the watching was worth more to him than any pleasure of his own life. "You keep bringing me exactly the wrong books," Marian told him one gray afternoon in the window seat of the small parlor that had become theirs, her father having tactfully learned to stay away. She had the more flora open on her knee. "The wrong books being, of course, precisely the right ones. How do you know what I want to read? We have hardly spoken." "I watched you," Everett said simply, "at the music party, and the 2 times I called before everything. You never looked at what a woman is supposed to look at. Your eyes went to the shelves, the maps, the queer stuffed bird your grandfather brought back from somewhere. I only had to notice where your attention went when you thought no one was watching. It went to interesting things, so I bring you interesting things." She was quiet a moment. "No one has ever watched where my attention went," she said. "Cecilia was the one worth watching. I was the furniture. It is a strange thing to discover at 23 that one has been observed after all." "You were never furniture," Everett said, with a low heat that surprised them both. "You were simply in a house that had trained itself to look at the wrong sister. I was not raised in that house. I saw what was actually there." He learned things about her, in those weeks, that no one had troubled to learn. That she wrote stories, essays, a whole secret drawer of them, which she confessed to him one evening with her chin up and her cheeks scarlet, braced for him to laugh, and which he asked, quite seriously, to be allowed to read, and did read that same night all of it, and returned the next morning grave and moved and told her the truth, which was that she wrote better than 3/4 of the men whose names were on the spines in his library. That she loved the outdoors and had been kept indoors, told a lady of no particular beauty had best not ruin her complexion further. And he began, deliberately, to take her walking, long muddy tramps across his land where she talked more freely than she ever did within 4 walls, and where he found himself, for the first time in memory, talking freely too. For that was the thing he had not expected, that in choosing her he would be chosen back, not for his title but in spite of it. She scolded him. She laughed at his stiffness and coaxed him out of it. When he retreated, as he did, into the cold, correct manner that had armored him for 15 years, she did not retreat with him. She reached straight through it, unafraid, and said things like, "You are doing the Duke voice again, Everett, and I much prefer the other one," until the armor became, in her company, simply too much trouble to keep up. One evening, walking back as the light failed, she stopped on the ridge above Lockridge Abbey and looked down at the great house, all its windows going gold in the dusk, and said, "I was so certain that morning in the library that I would spend my whole life being the sister you settled for. I had it all planned how I would bear it, how I would keep my dignity, how I would never let you see it hurt. And instead," she shook her head. "Instead you tore up a contract and knelt on a carpet, and now I do not know how to be a woman who is wanted. I keep bracing for the day you realize your mistake." Everett turned her to face him. "There is no mistake to realize," he said. "I have had 15 years to make mistakes about what I want, and I made every one of them and married none of them, thank God. You are the first thing I have been sure of. When you brace for the day I change my mind, brace instead for this, that I will spend the whole of our life proving I have not. I'm a slow man and a cold one by long habit, and I will fail at saying it prettily, but I will not fail at meaning it. You have my word, and I have never yet broken it." She looked up at him in the failing light, and something in her face finally, fully unclenched, the last of the shadow sister falling away. "Then I shall stop bracing," Marian said. "It is exhausting, and I would rather spend the strength on you." The wedding itself Everett remembered afterward in fragments, the way one remembers the best days, not as a sequence but as a scatter of bright things. The small gray church near the abbey, chosen over the grand one in town because Marian had said she could not be married under a great deal of guilt and half of society staring. She wanted only the people who actually cared. So there were few of them, and everyone wanted the couple well, and that was a thing Everett had never had at any gathering in his life. A room in which no single person wanted anything from him but his happiness. He remembered her coming up the aisle, not on a father's proud parade but quietly, a woman walking toward a thing she had chosen. He had half feared she would wear the armor, the still blank face, but she came to him with her eyes shining and a spot of ink on the finger that no scrubbing ever quite removed, and when she reached him she leaned in and whispered, so only he could hear, "You are doing the Duke voice with your face. Stop it. Marry me as the other one." And he had laughed out loud in a church, to the visible astonishment of the vicar, and the cold correct mask had cracked and fallen off him for good, and it had never afterward quite gone back on. He remembered signing the new contract, the one that had replaced the torn one, and how it had felt entirely different under his pen, not a shackle but a promise freely made. He remembered her father weeping with relief and gratitude in a corner, the debts long since quietly settled, the ruin averted, the family restored, and none of it any longer the reason for anything. He remembered thinking, with a clarity that would stay with him, I have signed a great many documents in my life, and this is the first one I signed because I wanted to and not because I was obliged. And he remembered the drive back to the Abbey afterward, the two of them alone in the carriage, and how Marian had grown suddenly shy, she who was never shy with him now, and had said, looking at her gloved hands, I keep thinking someone will discover the error, that the celebrated beauty is meant to be sitting here, and I am in her seat by a clerical mistake, and any moment a footman will arrive to set it right. Everett had taken her hand and turned it over and pressed his lips to the small, ineradicable ink stain, as he liked to do, as he would do for 30 years. Marian, he had said, hear me because I will only say it this plainly the once, and then I shall spend our whole life demonstrating it instead. There was never any error. There was a music party and a long concerto and a woman behind a pillar and a man who wanted her and could not have her, and then, by a mercy dressed up as a scandal, could. You are not in your sister's seat. Your sister was, for a little while, in the outer edge of a place that was always meant to be yours, the place beside a man who saw you first and chose you first and would have waited years for the chance if the chance had not fallen into his hands. There is no footman coming. There is no error to correct. There is only this. I looked at a whole glittering world of women who wanted my title, and I wanted the one who wanted nothing from me but a shared complaint about Corelli. Believe it or not as you like. I intend to make it undeniable. She had believed it. Not all at once. The habit of the shadows died slowly. But she had believed it, and the belief had grown in her, week by week and year by year, until the woman who had braced for the day he changed his mind became a duchess who teased her duke in front of cabinet ministers and wrote her secret stories in the open now, on the good desk in the good light, with her husband reading over her shoulder and pretending to disapprove. The Duke of Lockridge looked at Marian Ashford for a long moment, and then he did a thing that no one in that house, least of all her, expected. He crossed to the writing desk in the corner of the library, where the marriage contract lay ready for the final signatures, the great parchment that bound the Ashford fortune to the Lockridge title, that had been drawn up for Cecilia and amended for Marian, that represented the salvation of her family and the whole of her father's hope. He picked it up. He looked at it. And then, very deliberately watching her face, he tore it cleanly in two, and then in four, and set the pieces down on the desk. Marian made a small strangled sound. My father, the debts you cannot. Your father's debts I will settle regardless, said Everett. This afternoon, whatever you decide. I'm not a man who lets a family be ruined because I overheard a private conversation, and it was never the contract that stood between the Ashfords and the poorhouse. It was my willingness, and that has nothing to do with a piece of parchment. So, your family is safe. That is done, and it is separate, and it will hold whether you have me or send me away. Do you understand? The one thing has nothing to do with the other now. There is no gun to your head. There is no ruin behind you to run from. He came back across the room and stood before her, and then Everett, Duke of Lockridge, who had not knelt to anyone since he was presented to the king, he went down on one knee on the library carpet, and took her ink-stained hand in his, and looked up at her astonished face. "Marian Ashford," he said, "I have no contract now, and no advantage, and no excuse, and nothing whatever to gain but you. I am asking a plain woman with ink on her finger, though I have never in my life seen a face I would less willingly call plain, to marry a cold, stiff, overtitled man who does not know how to say what he feels and is making a very poor job of it now, but who has thought of no one else since a very long concerto last April. I do not want your sister. I never wanted your sister. I want the one behind the pillar who spoke to me as if I were a man and made me remember I was one. Will you have me? Not to save your family, they are saved. Not because you must, you need not. Only if you wish to. Only if, when you look at me, you see something you might in time choose." The tears that had been standing in her eyes spilled over at last, but they were not the tears of the trapped woman who had told her father she could not bear the pretending. They were something else entirely. "You tore up the contract," she whispered. "You had everything, and you tore it up and knelt on the floor and asked me as if I could say no. You can say no, that is the entire point. I would rather be refused by a free woman than accepted by a trapped one." His hand tightened around hers. "So, freely then, will you?" And Marian Ashford, who had spent 23 years being the sister who did not matter, the patch, the repair, the one they kept behind the pillar so as not to dim the beauty's light, looked down at the Duke of Lockridge on his knee before her with the torn contract behind him and no advantage left in the world, and understood all at once and past all doubting that she was not being settled for. She was being chosen. She had been chosen since April. She had simply been too accustomed to the shadows to believe that anyone had been looking there. "Yes," she said, freely, gladly, "yes." He rose then and drew her to him, and pressed his lips once gently to her ink-stained fingers, and then to her brow, and did not presume beyond it. For the door stood open and he was still at the heart of him, a man who did things properly. But he held her hands against his chest so that she could feel that his own composure had entirely deserted him, that his heart was going like a boy's, and Marian laughed through her tears at the discovery that the coldest man in society had a pulse after all, and that it beat, of all improbable things, for her. They were married 6 weeks later, a new contract drawn up, this one signed with something like joy, and the wedding was small and warm and had ink and books at the edges of it, and the Duke was seen to smile in public for perhaps the first time in living memory. Cecilia came back in time, as such sisters do, her captain having proved rather less than she had hoped, her beauty rather less negotiable than she had believed. She arrived at Lockridge Abbey in a rustle of expectation, quite certain that the sight of her would remind the Duke what he had missed, quite certain her plain sister was keeping his house but not his heart, and that a smile and a sigh would set matters to their natural order. She was received with perfect courtesy and not 1 degree more. Everett rose, bowed, inquired after her health, and then turned in front of her, deliberately, unmistakably, to his wife, and offered Marian his arm and said, "My dear, the light in the long gallery is exactly right for that book you were describing. Shall we?" And he led his Duchess out of the room and left the beauty standing quite alone by the fire, understanding at last, with a slow and mortifying clarity, that she had never been the one he wanted, that in running away she had not robbed her sister of a great match but handed her one, and that the world's pity, which she had counted on being directed at the plain sister settled upon in her place, had somehow, quietly, come to rest instead on the celebrated beauty who had thrown away a devoted man, and would never quite be able to explain to anyone how it had happened. In the long gallery, in the good light, Marian looked up at her husband. "You did that on purpose," she said. "I did," Everett admitted. "I find I have waited 15 years to be certain of something warm, and now that I am, I see no reason to be subtle about it." He touched the ink stain that never quite left her finger, the stain he had loved before he knew her name. "You were never the sister I settled for, Marian. You were the choice I made behind a pillar before there was any contract to force it. And every day I mean to make it again freely, gladly so that you never again spend 1 hour believing yourself a patch on any man's torn coat." "You are getting rather good," Marian observed, "at saying what you feel for a man who could not manage it in April." "I had excellent motivation," said the Duke of Lockridge, and smiled at his wife in the golden gallery light, "to learn.